Okay, we're at 10:30 now, so I'll get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Safety Connection. We have a big group today, which is wonderful to see and nice to meet you all. Just wanted to give you a quick introduction. My name is Naima, and I'm an account manager at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. WSPS is what we call ourselves. I just want to, for me, I connect with organizations, mainly in the Central East Side and the GTA, and I assist them with their health and safety needs and concerns. I connect with organizations to the correct resources within WSPS, whether that be training or consulting services. And before WSPS, I mainly worked in food manufacturing as a health and safety professional. So this gave me a good amount of experience working in manufacturing environments and supporting organizations in maintaining their compliance under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Now, if you're new to Safety Connections or WSPS, WSPS is a not-for-profit health and safety organization, and WSPS provides training, consulting, resources, and compliance support to help employers prevent workplace injuries and illnesses, manage workplace risks, and meet their legal obligations under the Health and Safety Act. We serve the manufacturing, agricultural, and service sectors across Ontario. And Safety Connections are webinars hosted by WSPS on various topics, and today's topic will be on critical injuries in manufacturing. Okay. Now, a quick disclaimer. This presentation is copied under licenses from Getty Images. Further reproduction, distribution, or transmission is prohibited unless a license is obtained from WSPS and or Getty Images. Okay, so to better understand who is participating in our Safety Connections and to ensure we are providing accessible training for all people in Ontario, we'd like to invite you to participate in a short survey. We are collecting demographic information on behalf of our funder, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. I will be referring to the ministry as the ministry throughout this presentation since they do have a very long name. Okay, so your responses will be kept secure and anonymous, and the ministry will not receive any of your personal information. WSPS will be analyzing the survey results in aggregate form prior to sending them to the ministry. Now, of course, completing the survey or answering any of your questions is optional. To access the survey, you can click on the link in the chat or on the screen, or you can also scan the QR code that you see on the screen there using your phone. Again, it is in the chat, so you can feel free to do it whenever you like. Okay, oh, sorry, one thing, going back. You will need the 6-digit function number to start the survey, which is shown on the screen again, and again, it is in the chat. And again, thank you for taking the time to complete the survey. Okay, so before we get started with today's webinar, I'd like to review some webinar housekeeping items with you all. Firstly, we recommend that you use your computer audio with headphones, but phone conference audio is available. The phone conference audio details can be found in the access email that you received. Your camera and microphone will remain off for the remainder of the session. And we appreciate participation throughout the webinar. Within this meeting, you will have the option to use reactions accessed in the menu bar. Reactions are instant and they'll float up on the screen. We will be asking poll questions throughout the webinar, which will pop up on your screen or in the meeting chat. So please select your answer and select submit to participate in the poll question. Dependent on your organization's security, you may not be able to interact with poll questions. If this is the case, please use the chat to participate. The meeting chat is accessed in the menu bar, and the chat is public and seen by all, so please send your messages at any time. Okay, Microsoft Teams offers 2 accessibility features which may be of use. To enable live caption, select More from the menu bar, Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. To enable full screen mode, select View from the menu bar, then select More Options, and then finally Full Screen. Both features can be disabled by following the same instructions. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, please send a message in the meeting chat or respond to the access email that you've received. Okay, so the Safety Connection program has 4 main goals. We want to learn, share, and discover what is value to you, which you are our customers in our community. Secondly, we want to connect virtually with industry peers, so please feel free to connect with each other as well. Third, to facilitate a best practice exchange. And lastly, to provide an opportunity to attend a health and safety webinar from your own personal workspace, which is wonderful. Okay, now I want to jump into the presentation. Again, just quick reminder, if any of you do have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. If anything pops up and I'm able to, I will answer. I also have Lori here on the meeting with me. She is a territory manager here at WSPS, so she may answer on my behalf as well. But we will have time for questions at the end. Okay, so jumping into the agenda for today, we have 3 main modules that we want to focus on. The first being critical injuries and reporting requirements. Second is investigations and root cause analysis exercise. And lastly, best practices and lessons learned. Okay, here are some quick objectives for today's discussion. At the end of the session, you will be able to define what a critical injury is, understand reporting requirements, be able to analyze a critical injury incident to determine the root cause and implement corrective actions, and lastly, to apply the lessons learned discussed within your workplace. Okay, so jumping into the definition of what a critical injury is, it's important to define what critical injuries are because you are able to then differentiate it from a first aid, medical aid, or a lost time injury. So a critical injury is defined under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Regulation 834, as if the incident causes your life in jeopardy, it produces unconsciousness, results in a substantial loss of blood, involves the fracture of a leg or an arm, but not a finger or toe, involves the amputation of a leg, arm, hand, or foot, but not a finger or toe, consists of burns to a major portion of the body, or causes the loss of sight in eye. Okay, so while the fracture of a single finger or single toe does not constitute a critical injury, the ministry does take the position that the fracture of more than one finger or more than one toe does constitute a critical injury, if it is of serious nature, of course. Now, similarly, while the amputation of a single finger or single toe does not constitute a critical injury, the ministry takes the position that, again, the amputation of more than one finger or more than one toe does constitute a critical injury. Again, this critical injuries are different from first aid, medical aid, or lost time. So just a quick reminder, first aids are any minor incidents not requiring medical aid. Medical aid is requiring any, of course, medical aid, but does not fit within the definition of critical injuries. And then lost time can be any type of medical aid, first aid, or even critical injuries and results in the loss of work. Okay. Okay, so when a critical injury, oh, did I see a hand go up? We're all good. Okay. When a critical injury happens at your workplace, these are the steps you must follow. So you want to immediately notify 911. Of course, with a serious injury has happened. So you want to first attend to the injured worker, provide any level of first aid, call 911, and secure the scene. From there, you will then contact the ministry using the number listed on the screen. Again, we will be providing resources following this presentation, which will list the reporting requirements and how to contact the ministry in the event of a critical injury. Okay, so you will get that resource at the end. You want to get your joint health and safety committee, or if you don't have a joint health and safety committee, your health and safety rep, get them involved. So this means informing them of the incident and getting them involved in the investigation that follows. You also want to inform the trade union if you do have one at your workplace. Now, within 48 hours, you must submit a written report to the ministry, which contains the circumstances of the incident, details of the incident, which would be the initial investigation that you have done, and any corrective actions already taken, as well as future corrective actions you plan to implement. Once again, the resources provided at the end of the presentation will include the report template that you must submit to the ministry within 48 hours of the critical injury. Okay. Okay, now how do you decide when to report? Although we are given the definition of what critical injuries are, incidents may happen at your workplace where you're unsure whether to report to the ministry or not. This does happen. It has happened to me as well. So when in doubt, ask two simple questions. Did the critical injury occur where a worker was working or could reasonably be expected to work? And is there a reasonable connection between what caused the incident and a realistic risk to workers' health and safety? If the answer to both questions is yes, the incident must be reported. Okay, these two criteria are the key tests for determining your reporting obligation. I just want to give a quick little story time because I did mention this did happen to me once. So I was working as a health and safety specialist for another company. And an incident did happen where a forklift driver was driving and then suddenly decided to stop the machine. They parked, and it seemed as though when investigating the incident afterwards through camera footage, it seems as though he did become unconscious for about 20 seconds. So when investigating the incident and speaking to witnesses and the involved worker himself, it was unclear whether he did lose consciousness. And so to be on the safe side, I did decide to report this incident to the ministry, and I followed all the reporting requirements. So when speaking to the inspector, although this incident happened due to a medical condition, they did appreciate that the incident was reported because again, it ensures whether you're unsure or not, it's best that you report and then allow the investigator or the inspector to do the investigation. And again, it ensures that you're compliant. Okay. Okay, moving into scene preservation. So when an incident happens following a critical injury, the scene must be preserved to protect evidence and support a thorough investigation. Nothing should be moved, altered, or disturbed unless it is necessary to save a life. Relieve human suffering, prevent further injury, and maintain essential public utilities, prevent unnecessary damage to equipment or property, or the ministry inspector allows you to do so. So preserving the scene helps ensure investigators can accurately determine what happened and identify the root causes to prevent future incidents. So again, key message here, you want to immediately report, give proper notification, timely notification, and protect or preserve the scene are critical steps following the workplace critical injury. Okay, so I'll give a little pause there. Is everyone good? Any questions? Just give me a quick thumbs up if Yeah? Okay, perfect. Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. The next slide here, we do have a poll. Okay, so the poll should pop up on your screen or in the chat.
There's a hand up if you wanted to
Oh,
take
yeah.
a look.
Sure, please go ahead.
Michael, did you have a question? Your hand is up. He might have just been giving you a thumbs up, Naima. It's okay.
No problem, Michael. Okay, so you should see the poll question come up. The question is, how confident are you in leading or participating in critical injury investigations? So your options there are very confident, somewhat confident, or not very confident. Again, the reason for this question, I see a lot of you've already answered, which is great. Thank you. Reason for this question, I just want to see who has been involved in a critical injury, in a critical injury investigation. And if you haven't, that's actually good news, because we obviously don't want any critical injuries happening. But if you have been involved, again, the reason for this session is to kind of analyze that and figure out how to investigate those situations and then come up with corrective action. So as a preventative measure, so we don't see it happen or reoccur. Okay, so wonderful. I got around 55 people or 56 people here saying very confident, which is great, and a couple saying not very confident. So I'm glad you joined the session. I hope we can answer a lot of your questions. Okay, I'll move on. Okay, now we have a quick little chat discussion. So question here is, what are some reasons employers accidentally destroy evidence after an incident occurs? Okay, so this could be anything, whatever you feel, or maybe since a couple of you have been involved, please feel free to put your answers in. Yeah, keep production going, of course, especially in manufacturing. Cleaning up, yes. Like I said, I worked in food manufacturing and sanitation was a big part of the job. Unaware of the rules, sure, yeah, of course. Not securing the scene, yes. Lack of training. Lack of understanding, which is a good one, yeah. Nervousness, yeah, good one. Lack of knowledge of process. Hiding evidence, yeah. Accountability. Okay, yeah, if a fracture breaks, sometimes not converted until days later. Yeah, that's a good one. So in those situations, once you become aware of it, you do want to still report it to the ministry. Okay, treating injured worker and not securing the scene. Yeah, fear of blame, hiding it from other employees, miscommunication, safety culture. Yeah, that's a big one. So safety culture is very important. If you don't have the right safety culture, again, that comes down to a lot of the things many of you said, like process, training. It does cause some panic for sure. Yeah. Okay, these are wonderful answers. So thank you so much for participating in this. And you basically hit all of the ones that I wanted to kind of discuss. So, trying to resume production, you just want to go in and clean up. You're moving equipment. Lack of awareness is a big one. And maybe you have good intentions, you just don't know what the process was, right? Especially with critical injuries, since they don't happen often. Of course, again, we don't want them to happen. You may just, again, lack of awareness. It may happen, especially during, in those types of situations, it can cause some panic. So you don't really know how to respond. So in the urgency to respond, employers may unknowingly clean up the area, move equipment, repair damaged machinery, discard broken parts, or overlook the importance of preserving documentation and witness information as well. So while often there is well intentions, these actions may compromise the investigation and make it more difficult to determine what really happened. So another quick story time. This is another company I was working for as a health and safety specialist. Different from the forklift incident that I had spoke about. So we had a new maintenance worker who was working on a gearbox for a new conveyor being installed for a new line. And while working on the gear, the machine turned on and his finger did get caught inside. He did end up losing the tip of his finger in the incident. Once he received medical attention and was taken to the hospital, the sanitation team did come in and clean up the scene immediately after the incident and did end up disposing the finger. So not only did this lose his ability to reattach his finger, cleaning the incident did make the investigation difficult. Now, please note, the incident was not a critical injury because going back to the definition, you only need to report if it was multiple fingers. Okay. Thank you again for participating in that. Okay, we'll move on. Manufacturing critical injury trends. Okay, so the majority of critical injuries in manufacturing involve a small number of high-risk hazards. So the most common include machine entanglement, caught between and crushing incidents, falls, mobile equipment such as forklifts, exposure to electrical or stored energy due to inadequate lockout tagout, confined spaces, and struck by objects. So understanding these trends help employers focus their prevention efforts on the hazards most likely to result in life-altering injuries or fatalities. So I encourage you all to take a look at your workplaces, look at the operations and equipment, conduct a hazard assessment to determine whether the potential for these types of incidents can occur, and then implement corrective actions as preventative measures. And continuous improvement is always very important once corrective actions are implemented to make sure that they're still working and still relevant to whatever the basically the hazard was. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is another poll. So you'll see it pop up on your screen. Okay, the question here is, which hazard do you believe causes the highest number of fatal or critical injuries in manufacturing? Okay, so your option A is slip, trips, and falls. Option B is machinery, so caught in crushing or entanglement injuries. Option C is chemical exposure. And option D is ergonomic injury, so whether that's sprain or strains. Yeah, okay, wonderful. Some people are adding in the chat. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Okay, a lot of people have answered. Thank you so much. Okay, as people are still answering, I just want to say that all of these injuries or injury types do happen in a manufacturing environment, especially. Now we just want to look at what could be the highest number resulting in a critical injury. Okay, so if you answered, yeah. So the hazard that consistently causes the highest number of fatal and critical injuries is contact with machinery and equipment. So this could be caught in, crushed by, entanglement, or struck by incidents. Okay, so while WSIB, so the answer here was B, option B. So if you answered B, you're correct. So while WSIB does not publish data ranking hazards by cause across manufacturing, investigations by the ministry, WSIB, and Ontario Safety Associations consistently identify machine-related incidents as the leading cause of catastrophic injuries in the manufacturing sector. But again, all of these types of incidents do happen, and you might have seen it in your own workplaces. Okay. Okay, so we're going to jump into module 2, which is investigation and root cause analysis. Okay, so when a critical injury occurs, the goal of an investigation is not to determine who is at fault, but to understand why the incident happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Okay, so effective investigations move beyond the obvious to identify the underlying organizational failures that allow the incident to occur. To start with, so you always want to start with the immediate cause of the incident. So the immediate cause is a direct event or unsafe act or condition that led to the injury. So this usually answers the question, what happened? Okay, so the example of this would be worker's hand entered the machine's point of operation, or the employee fell from an unsecured ladder, or a forklift struck a pedestrian. So these are what we see, but they rarely tell the whole story. Okay, so contributing factors are the circumstances that increase the likelihood of the incident. They explain how the immediate cause was able to happen. So examples of this is inadequate machine guarding or lack of training or competency, or this could be poor housekeeping, time pressure, production demands, inadequate supervision, or even equipment not properly maintained or poor communication during shift change. So all of these could be considered contributing factors as to why that immediate cause of the incident or what happened. Okay, so often there are multiple contributing factors working together. Now, we want the point of root cause analysis is to come down to the root cause. The root cause is the underlying system failure that is corrected, would prevent similar incidents from reoccurring again. Okay, so that should be always the goal when an incident does occur. You want to figure out what happened, why did it happen, and how can we prevent it from happening again. Okay, so this answers the question, why did this happen? Okay, so examples of this could be there wasn't any proper lockout tagout program or ineffective implementation if you do have a program. Risk assessment failed to identify the hazard. So maybe you've done risk assessments, but you failed to identify that specific hazard. Weak safety culture, which was mentioned in the chat earlier. So prioritizing production over safety, which we see too often in the manufacturing world. Inadequate change management process. So I know especially during manufacturing, if we have multiple shift change, during shift change, there is a lot of processes involved. So inadequate change in process could happen. Deficient preventative maintenance program. Okay, so if you have a maintenance program, but there are some gaps, it could lead to an injury. Lack of management accountability, right? So, of course, management is there for supervision and for proper providing us with the proper training and telling us about the hazards that they are aware of. So if there is a lack of that, it could lead to incidents. So root causes are most always related to the system, the process, leadership, or organizational controls. It's not simply the worker behavior. Okay, so we often always start looking at the person involved and what their behavior was that led to the incident. That's not always the case. So corrective actions should address the root cause, not just the symptoms. Strong corrective actions eliminate or control the hazard and strengthen the organization's safety system. Okay, so what are some examples of corrective actions that we might see? Installing engineering controls or machine guarding, revisiting safe work procedures, updating them, implementing or strengthening your lockout tagout process, improve supervisor accountability, conduct competency-based training, update risk assessments and inspection programs, verify effectiveness through follow-up audits and observations. These are just some examples. So if your corrective action is simply retrain the employee, you've likely addressed a symptom and not the root cause of the incident. Okay. Okay, so I want to jump into a quick scenario. So this is a scenario of a critical injury incident that did happen at a manufacturing facility. Okay, so a manufacturing facility produces metal automotive components using a hydraulic stamping press. Now, during production, the operator noticed a part had become jammed inside. Rather than waiting for maintenance, the operator opened the access gate and reached into the press to remove the part. The machine unexpectedly cycled while the employee's hand was inside the point of operation. The worker did sustain multiple crush injuries, resulting in the amputation of 3 fingers. Okay, so the machine had a lockout tagout procedure available, but it was not used because operators believed clearing jams only takes a few seconds. Okay, so that's our scenario here. I'm going to move into the next slide, which is a poll. Okay, so it should pop up once again. The question here is, what was the root cause of this critical injury? So we've talked a little bit about root cause. So think back to that incident. What do you think could be the root cause here? So option A is the worker reached into the machine without thinking. Option B, the worker failed to follow lockout tagout procedure. Option C, the machine unexpectedly cycled. And option D, the workplace system failed to ensure hazardous energy was controlled. Okay, so I'll give you a couple minutes there to answer. Okay, wonderful. 83 responses. Okay, great. So I see a lot of you have answered D, which is correct. Okay, so the workplace system failed to ensure hazardous energy was controlled. So thank you again for participating. Now, a good investigation continues until it identifies why the procedure wasn't followed, right? So critical injuries almost never occur because one poor decision. Okay, there's always a chain reaction, and they occur because of multiple system failures. Okay, so thank you again. Okay, so going back to that specific incident, when doing investigations, 5 why analysis is actually a very common method used to determine what the root cause of the incident is. Sometimes, especially depending on what the incident was, it may be difficult to come down to the root cause. So this is a great way to kind of break down what those contributing factors were, so you can come down to the root and then address that root cause. So here I've broken down the incident using this method. You essentially start off with the immediate cause of the incident and then keep asking why did that happen until you come down to the root cause. So your first question here was, why was the worker critically injured? Now the immediate cause here is their hand was inside the press while it cycled. Now you ask why once more. Why was their hand inside the press? They were clearing a jam without isolating hazardous energy. Why wasn't hazardous energy isolated? Operators routinely cleared minor jams without using lockout tagout because it slowed production. Okay, and then you ask again why? Why had this unsafe practice become normal? Supervisors tolerated the shortcut. Training emphasized production over hazard recognition, and there was a little verification of lotto compliance or lockout tagout compliance. Okay, and then finally here, why did the organization allow this to continue? The organization failed to identify jam clearing as a high-risk task, requiring engineering safeguards, supervision, and a strong safety culture. Okay, so risk assessment and management oversight were inadequate. Okay, so here we come down to our root cause. We know this incident happened because the lack of engineering safeguards, supervision, and a strong safety culture. Okay, so now we can go look back at that incident now that we know what the root cause is and develop corrective actions from there. Yeah, interlock gate. That's a good one. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is another poll. Okay. When doing 5 why investigations, how many why questions should you ask? Okay, so option A, 3, option B, 5, and then option C, as many as needed until the system failures are identified. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. A lot of quick responses there. Okay, so if you answered C, that is correct. As many as needed until system failures are identified. Okay, so when using the 5 why method, you keep asking why. The point is to keep asking why until you determine the root cause as to why that system failed and led to that incident. Okay, so you may even need to go beyond 5 questions. Okay, it really just depends on the incident that occurred and the complexity of it and how many contributing factors there were. Okay, so it could be a very minor incident where you're only having to ask maybe 3. Okay, so it really just depends on the incident. Okay, so thank you for participating in that. Okay, so going back to that incident, I want to focus a little bit more on the corrective actions. So for the incident we covered, here are some possible corrective actions you can implement to prevent reoccurrence. So some of these we've talked about, some of them you've already mentioned in the chat, which I've noticed as well. So engineering controls is one, to prevent access to that moving part. So interlock gate is, someone mentioned interlock gate, that's one option. So interlock guards that prevent cycling when it is open. Reviewing jam clearing procedures. Okay, so having a proper procedure in place. You don't want to simply stop at creating the procedure. You want to make sure training is happening. Hands-on training is, especially in these situations, you're having hands-on training, and you're doing it at a regular basis, right? So whether it's up to you and your organization how often you want to do that, whether it's annual, biannual, but you want to make sure that everyone is properly trained and authorized. So refresher training on lockout tagout is another. Supervisory verification of lockout tagout. Okay, so again, going back to that person who is trained and authorized, right? Especially with high risk tasks, you want to make sure they're properly trained and authorized to do that. Addressing production pressures, I encourage just shortcuts. So I know oftentimes in manufacturing, we do have deadlines we need to meet. It does cause some pressure, especially to our workers. So we want to not encourage any shortcuts. And that comes down to, again, that safety culture. If you have that culture in place, you have those daily talks. So in previous jobs that I had, we always had huddle discussions every morning, which involves safety. So just, again, encouraging to take your time. If you notice any hazards, you report the hazards right away, and not encouraging any shortcuts. Regular audits of hazardous energy control practices. Okay, so this could be hazard assessments. If you do a hazard assessment, you always want to look at the hazards identified, implement corrective actions, but also continuous improvement, right? So you don't want to do it once and done. You want to always go back to that. Again, up to you and your organization when you want to do that. You always want to, again, reassess if anything changes within the business. So if you have a new line, a new machine, a new part that comes in, maybe you have your production has increased as compared to a few months ago. You always want to reassess again and identify any hazards, and then again implement controls, and again see how effective those controls are in preventing injury. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Moving into the next slide, we have another poll. Okay, so a lot of polls to keep you engaged here. Okay, so the question here is, which corrective action would have the highest impact on preventing a similar incident? Okay, so option A is retrain the injured worker. Option B, issue disciplinary action. Option C, install engineering controls and straighten hazardous energy control systems. or D, put up additional warning signs? Oh, wow. Okay. So we have 100% of us saying C here, which is great to see. I'm glad to see that. Okay, so if you answered C, yes, that is correct. So this reinforces the hierarchy of controls. Okay, so if you heard of the hierarchy and controls, it basically lists out different types of controls, but the highest being elimination, of course, and then next being engineering controls. Okay, so administrative controls is a type of control, which could be things like training, procedures, discipline. They are important, but they mostly rely on human behavior. Okay. And with human behavior, as we know, that's not really something we can control at all times. Engineering controls, so such as interlocked guards, presence sensing devices, automatic jam clearing systems, these are more effective because they reduce the reliance on workers making the right decision every time. Okay, so in every situation, it's always best to either, if you can eliminate the control, eliminate the hazard altogether, that's perfect. But oftentimes in manufacturing, engineering is the best way to go. So this naturally leads into discussing why investigations should focus on identifying and correcting system weaknesses rather than assigning blame. Okay, so we never want to assign blame. Yeah, that's a good one. So maybe investigating, so we have Connie here, maybe investigating why the machine keeps jamming as well. Okay, thank you for participating in that poll. I'll move on. Okay, so why do investigations often fail? Okay, so maybe investigations fail when they focus on who made the mistake rather than why did it happen. Okay, so it's very easy for us. Again, it's just human nature. When an incident happens, we look at who was involved and what did they do, right? So going back to that incident we discussed before, so that person decided to stick their hand in because they wanted to do a shortcut. They've always done it this way, and they felt like they could clear the jam themselves, right? So we often look at that person and we say, why would they do that? Okay. Again, and that's why investigations often fail, because we're looking at the human behavior rather than why did it happen. So blaming workers and then stopping at human error, failing to conduct a root cause analysis, or not implementing and verifying corrective actions all increase the likelihood that the same incident will happen again. Okay, so the idea again in investigating is always to figure out why did it happen and how can we prevent it from happening again. Okay, prevention is always the goal because we don't want incidents to happen, of course. So a successful investigation identifies system failures and drives continuous improvement, not blame. Yeah, biases. So I see in the chat biases when conducting investigation for sure. So there often is bias. And so focusing on why did it happen rather than who made the mistake, that can help in taking bias out. Okay. Okay. Now, effective investigations are not about finding someone to blame once again. They are about understanding how and why the system allowed the incident to occur. So instead of asking who made the mistake, ask what conditions, processes, or controls allowed this mistake to happen. Okay, so by identifying the true root cause, you can develop meaningful corrective actions, verify their effectiveness, and continuously improve workplace safety. Okay, moving into module 3, which is lessons learned. So a critical part of any injury investigation is transforming the findings into lessons learned that can be applied across the organization. So the purpose of sharing lessons learned is not to focus on the individual involved in the incident, but to identify patterns, system weaknesses, and opportunities to prevent similar events from happening again. Many serious incidents are not caused by a single failure. So they are often the result of multiple breakdowns that develop over time and become accepted as normal, right? So maybe that incident started off as a near miss, and that's why it is important to report near misses, right? Because it could always escalate from near miss, first aid, medical aid, and then end up in a critical injury if it's not addressed. So recognizing these recurring themes allows organizations to move from reacting to incidents towards, and then rather towards proactively managing risk. Okay, so some common lessons learned from critical injuries in manufacturing are poor machine guarding. Okay, so we see this too often in the manufacturing world. Okay, so machine guarding failures continue to be a significant contributor to serious injuries in manufacturing. So these hazards may exist when guards are missing, when they're bypassed, if it's poorly designed, right? So if it's not a locked guard, if they're removed for convenience or during maintenance or sanitation, which happens very often. So in removing the guards, there could be a mistake that happens and they're not put back. Right? So engineering controls must be the most, can be the most reliable, but they need to be maintained and they need to be verified. Okay, so a hazard that can physically injure a worker should never rely solely on awareness or administrative controls. Okay, next here is normalization of deviation. So over time, workers and supervisors may become accepting of unsafe practices because nothing's happened yet, right? So we hear that a lot. People say, oh, well, in my 30 years, that's never happened. So I doubt it will happen here, right? So a safe outcome does not mean a safe process. Complacency, yeah, that's a good one. So repeated exposure to risk without an incident can create a false sense of safety. Okay, so examples of this could be reaching into equipment during short stoppages, bypassing interlocks, skipping lockout tagout procedures for quick adjustments, or walking under suspended loads. Okay, um, these are all examples of the normalization of deviation. Now, moving into poor supervision. So supervisors, they play a critical role in ensuring procedures are followed, right? Hazards are corrected and workers have the resources they need to work safely. So safety expectations must be actively reinforced through either coaching, observation, and accountability, not just written procedures or policies, right? So it's great when you have those procedures, but are they being followed? Okay, next is weak procedures. So a procedure that is unclear, outdated, or unrealistic could lead to workers being or developing their own methods to complete tasks, right? So again, going back to supervision in these cases as well, right? If you have a procedure, is it a strong procedure? Have you looked at all the hazards involved? Have you looked at corrective actions? Have you looked at everything as a whole, right? And then basically safe work procedures, they must reflect actual work conditions and involve input from employees as well who perform the task because they're the ones doing the task every day. They may also have input as well. So always encourage your employees to speak up and be involved in these situations in these procedures. Poor risk assessments. So it's important that you do risk assessments. That's how you identify risk within your workplace. And many incidents occur because hazards were not identified or evaluated before work began. So risk assessments could be proactive and completed whenever there are changes to equipment, the process, material. Maybe you had a lot of new staff join the team or work conditions as well. Okay. Production pressure is another one. So when production targets, deadlines, downtime concerns, when these things take priority, workers may feel pressure to take shortcuts. And so organizations must ensure that safety is built into operational decisions. The safest method must always be the expected method. Okay. So next is communication failure. So important information can be lost during shift changes between departments or when contractors are involved. Effective communication systems are critical controls. So workers need timely information about hazards, right? And changes in expectations. So making sure you keep that communication within your workplace. Contractors is another one. So certain organizations do have contractors that come in and out of their building. So making sure your contractors are familiar about your site-specific hazards, procedures, and safety expectations. This could be a gap. So companies must verify also the contractor's qualifications, right? Do they provide site orientation? Are they communicating hazards with them or monitoring work activities? And then the last thing here we have is lack of verification. So having policies and procedures in place does not always guarantee that they're effective. So organizations must verify that controls are working through either workplace inspections, safety observations, audits, equipment checks, employee feedback, or corrective action follow-up. So the most valuable outcome of an injury investigation is not always just the report, it's the change that prevents the next injury. Okay, so you've done your investigation, you figured out the root cause, you decided on corrective actions to implement. Have they been implemented? Are they effective in preventing that injury? And are they going to continuously prevent any future injuries from reoccurring? Okay, so a strong safety culture always asks what conditions allowed this to happen and what systems do we need to improve so it doesn't happen again. Okay, next thing here is a chat question. So think of one incident from your workplace without naming names. What system failure allowed it to happen? Okay, so just think back to everything that we discussed in terms of system failures leading to incidents. And think about an example within your workplace, something maybe you've noticed yourself or been involved in yourself, and feel free to add it in the chat. Yeah, not recognizing that hazardous energy was present, bypassing safety devices, missing tools to execute the work safely, yeah. Inadequate engineering controls, no lockout tagout, lack of supervision, yeah, we talked about that as well. Lack of training, cost cutting, yeah, for sure. Complacency is a big one. Production pressure, lack of safety buy-in by management, not following safety protocols, so you have the procedures, just not being followed, lack of implementation of your health and safety program, yeah, missing risk assessment. So sometimes it's just you start off by trying to identify the risks, right? How would you know if you don't know about the hazards that exist? Lack of procedure accuracy, no validation controls in place for training, yeah, guard removal, yeah, design of equipment. Okay, so these are all really great, basically system failures that could lead or even contributing. Some of these were contributing factors that could lead to an incident occurring, right? So whether that be a near miss, first aid incident, medical incident, or going down to critical injuries, right? So we always want to go back to the incident involving you always want to go back to the incident and figure out, again, going through that investigation process, figuring out what happened and developing those corrective actions. Yeah, lack of safety commitment. Okay, yeah. So I want to go back to the incident that I discussed involving the maintenance worker who lost his finger, right? So many system failures were at play here. Effective lockout tagout was not done, which led to that incident. And this was also, I want to mention, this was also a new worker and who didn't have or had very limited experience as they were young and starting off in their career. And we do see this pretty often, not just in manufacturing, but any workplace, right? Oftentimes new workers, they are the most vulnerable. And so that training does need to happen, right? So the organization did fail in identifying this as a high risk task. and then training was not followed, and there was no effective supervision either, right? So with lockout tagout, you always want to have properly trained and authorized personnel involved, and this ultimately led to that system failure. Okay, so thank you for participating in that. Okay, so lastly here, I just want to go through a final scenario that, again, I want to kind of summarize everything that we talked about so far. So a forklift, here's the scenario. A forklift operator is traveling through a busy production area and strikes a pedestrian employee crossing the aisle. Okay, so in manufacturing environments, we do oftentimes have to share the workspace with pedestrians and mobile equipment. Okay, and in these situations, it can become quite difficult, especially if you haven't identified proper procedures, kind of outlining best practices, right? So if you look at your work environment, you look at pedestrian safety and forklift operation or mobile equipment operation, you want to figure out what can you implement in those situations, right? So in this situation, the worker did suffer a broken pelvis and did require hospitalization, leading to a critical injury. So again, going back to critical injuries in this situation, you want to call 911. You want to make sure they get the help that they need. You're providing first aid if needed. You're preserving that scene. And then you're calling the Ministry of Labor, using that number to inform them of the situation. The inspector will come by, do a quick investigation. As that's happening, you want to still make sure you're doing your own internal investigation. So everything we discussed already about doing that 5 why analysis or any type of investigation process you might already use internally, investigate that situation, figure out what happened, why did it happen, what was the root cause of the incident, implement either basically you implement any immediate corrective actions, and then maybe even develop future corrective actions that you want to implement. Okay, so contributing factors here, okay, that led to this incident. So that was basically the immediate cause. Now, what are the contributing factors? So poor pedestrian and forklift traffic separation, right? So if you're able to in your workplace, if you can separate the two, that's wonderful, right? So having designated pedestrian pathways allows pedestrians to kind of move throughout the warehouse or area without, being too worried about forklift traffic. But of course, you always want to encourage awareness, right? So if they are turning corners or moving from one area to the next, you always want to be aware of your surroundings. And then similarly for forklifts, you want to train your forklift drivers on safe operation, right? So do they have, are they honking their horns when they're turning corners? Are they checking their blind spots? Are they moving at a safe speed? Right? Are they following all those specific safety procedures to make sure that you're sharing a space with pedestrians? You want to make sure that you're following all the right procedures there. Now, if you're not able to, or if you have very limited space within your workplace and you're not able to create that separation, you still want to apply the same rules, right? So still encouraging awareness, checking blind spots, moving at a safe pace, honking your horns, implementing more control measures from there, right? Having convex mirrors, you can add lights to your forklift so that the pedestrians know you're coming. There's even things that you can implement within your forklifts with the sensory options as well, that stop the vehicle if something were to come near. So limited visibility at intersections is one that we already discussed. Lack of designated walkways or crossing points. Inadequate communication between workers and equipment operators, right? So that communication is also important. So not just honking, like if you see someone, if you're the pedestrian and you see a forklift driver, make yourself seen, right? Wave to them, speak to them so they know you're there. Insufficient supervision or monitoring traffic controls, right? So if that supervision piece is very important as well. So are your supervisors and managers there supervising and making sure that all these processes are being followed? Now, what was the root cause here, right? So the organization did not have an effective traffic management system to identify and control the risk associated with mobile equipment and pedestrian interaction, right? So if you don't have that proper management system in place, identifying those risks, that's how you can slowly lead to those incidents from happening. Okay, so you always want to identify the hazards first and implement controls. So that should always be your first bet. Now, corrective actions. These are just some options that you could do, right? You can install physical barriers or designated pedestrian discussed. Review and update the workplace traffic management plan. So if you already have a plan, maybe you want to look back on what could be the gaps, what are you missing, what more can you do? Right, so there's a lot of signage out there that you can put. You can, do markings on the ground. You can add lighting. You can add actual physical barriers. So all of these could help in preventing. So improving signage, lighting is another one. So we always want to look at lighting as well, right? So especially production areas, if you have inadequate lighting, it could lead to injury. And intersection controls, right? So if you have various intersections, it can create a lot of blind spots. So you're looking at that as well. Provide competency-based forklift and pedestrian safety training. So making sure that that training is happening and those reminders, you're always reminding your workers. So doing those safety talks, again, it helps improve that safety culture as well. And then conducting regular inspections and verify that controls remain effective, right? So if you're doing, whether you're part of your joint health and safety committee and you're doing your monthly inspections, as well as daily inspections as well. So that's maybe something your supervisors are doing. They're coming around and doing their daily inspections every day. But I do encourage you, if you're a worker yourself, before you start your shift, just look around, be aware, look for hazards, do a quick inspection of your workplace. If you notice anything out of place, if you notice a driver not following the rules, it's always good to kind of speak up. Because you never know, anything can happen. And I, again, encourage communication, right? So we talked about communication, that is really important. Okay, so the key takeaway here, the incident was not simply caused by a forklift operator hitting a pedestrian, right? It was the result of gaps in the system that allowed pedestrian and mobile equipment to interact unsafely. Okay, so effective investigations look just beyond the event and identify what controls are needed to prevent reoccurrence. Okay, so the next slide here is a poll. So it's going to pop up on your screen there. Okay, so the question here is, what is the biggest challenge at your workplace when conducting investigation? So there's no right answer here. I just want you to take a look at whether this is your current workplace or a previous workplace. If you've ever been involved in investigating any type of incident, not just critical injuries, what was the biggest challenge that you found when investigating? So this could be either finding the true root cause, right? Or time constraints. So maybe, you're in a production area, you have deadlines to meet, maybe the investigation or conducting a proper investigation, you just didn't have the time for it. Lack of management support. So that's something we may see as well, right? Especially if you're part of your joint health and safety committee, management should be involved in those situations. So when you're doing these investigations, are you getting support from them? If you develop or come up with corrective actions, are you giving that to your employer as a suggestion? And are you getting a response back from them, right? Option D is poor reporting. So oftentimes incidents do occur and they're just not reported, right? And in those instances, if they're not reported, how can you investigate? And then option E is implementing corrective actions. So maybe you have corrective actions that you want to implement. Again, they're just not being implemented. Or if they are being implemented, are they actually addressing that root cause? Are they actually effectively preventing that injury from reoccurring? And then option F is preventing reoccurrence. Okay, so that's the continuous improvement part. Are you looking back at the corrective actions that were implemented, or is it still effective? Has anything changed in your process? Is there new equipment? If that is the case, are you looking back on how can we implement corrective actions? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know some of these, maybe you do have more than one answer here, which is completely okay. Again, I just want you to kind of look at or take lessons learned from this and look at your own organization. When incidents do occur and you're investigating, what could be the gaps there? And then go back and address those gaps, right? So if you notice any of these happening, right, how can we best implement this when investigating incidents to kind of prevent reoccurrence, right? Because that's always the goal. Okay, so I know we got a few responses here, the most being finding the true root cause. I know with incident investigations, it can be quite difficult to figure out what that root cause is. And we oftentimes kind of stop at either that immediate cause blame, or, those contributing factors, right? So again, encourage you guys to, again, when doing investigations, try your best to come down to that root cause. And think outside of the box. A lot of times you do kind of have to think outside of the box a little bit. Look at every process in place, right? Not just the specific action that happened. And try your best to implement those corrective actions, right? You want to work with your employer, see what's possible, what's not possible to do. Of course, it needs to be reasonable. Again, encourage you guys just to take a look and rethink some of those investigations that you're doing. Okay, so thank you again for participating in that. Okay. Okay. So in closing, as we close today's discussion, it's important to remember that preventing critical injuries is not only a moral responsibility, it is a legal obligation. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers do have the duty to take every precaution reasonable within the circumstance to protect the health and safety of their workers. So if a critical injury investigation often reveals that the incident was not caused by one single action, right? So we discussed this, but a series of missed opportunities. So hazards were not, either the hazards were not identified, controls were not implemented, procedures were just not followed, or the systems that were not properly verified. So you have systems, but they just weren't properly verified. So the key questions organizations must continually ask are, have we implemented effective controls to eliminate or reduce risk? Are our procedures realistic, understood, or followed? Are we verifying that our safety systems are actually working? Are we acting when we see unsafe conditions or behavior? So we've seen it. Are we communicating that? Are we addressing it? Okay, now poll questions throughout this session, they highlighted an important point, right? So critical injuries are often preventable when organizations proactively identify risks, address system failures, and continuously improve their safety programs. Employers cannot rely on assumptions such as we have never had an incident before, or workers have always done it this way. right? So if you've never even seen an incident, oftentimes people say, okay, well, it's never happened. Why take the time to do these risk assessments, right? It's never happened. You've never seen it. It probably will never happen here again, right? So due diligence means being proactive, anticipating hazards, looking at that risk or the potential of it happening, and then taking reasonable steps to control the risk and being able to demonstrate that those steps were taken, right? So it's very important that you identify it and prevent it from happening in the first place. So when a critical injury occurs, the question is not only what happened, but also why, what did we know, right? What should have we known? And what reasonable actions did we take to prevent it? So failing to meet these responsibilities can result in enforcement action, including even prosecution under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, where an employer is found guilty of failing to meet their legal obligations, right? Especially when we're looking at critical injuries. So the goal is not simply to respond to injuries, it is to create systems strong enough to prevent them from happening in the first place. Okay. Okay, so WSPS is here to help. We have many free resources on our website. We can provide either complimentary consulting, training, certifications, as well as even the WSIB Health and Safety Program support. So if you've heard of the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program, we are one of the providers in that. So if that's something you're interested in joining, you can go on our website. We do have a lot of information on there. Please connect with us, and then we can help you through that in terms of setting up your registration and then helping you and guiding you throughout the program. If you do want to learn more, again, feel free to reach out after the presentation and I'll be happy to connect with you. Okay. Here is a list of resources. Again, this will be provided to you after the session. So this will most likely be emailed out to all of you. So you will be able to kind of go through these resources and basically everything we discussed, especially with reporting, you'll be able to access that. Okay. Okay, so complimentary consulting services. So if your business is in, whether you're in the manufacturing, service, or agricultural sectors, if you pay WSIB premiums, you are a WSPS member. Okay, so we can assist you. So this could be health and safety assessments. So one of our safety experts will visit, we can come in person and visit your location to help you identify hazards or program gaps to get your business in legislative compliance. So those risk assessments that we talked about, if that's something you're interested in, you want to take a look at, maybe you've never done it before, you do want some support, we're happy to come in and kind of guide you through that. Even we can do the actual assessment ourselves. And again, help you with corrective actions and giving you recommendations from there. Another is review your WSIB safety check. Okay, so you can go on WSIB and actually search up the company that you work for, and it gives you a good oversight of basically the claims that you've had at your workplace. And so one of our safety experts can assist with insights on that data for better performance, but to also understand what that data means. Okay. Small business advisory service. So if you are a small business, we do have experts that basically give you more one-on-one support and provide personalized support for small business owners. So if you are a small business, again, I encourage you to reach out. We're happy to assist you. We also have 1 day of consulting. So if you have received a Ministry of Labor visit and it did result in an order, you are eligible for 1 day on-site consulting to help your business get back in compliance. So whether, depending on what the order is, of course, we are always happy to help and help you and guide you through it, but also help you in clearing it. So we can give you that 1 day of free consulting. Okay. The optional survey is in the chat again, so please feel free to open up that link or use the QR code to answer the survey. And now I just want to jump into questions. We have about 15 minutes. So if there's any questions I didn't get to in the chat, which I know there was a lot of good engagement there, but I'm sure something may have been missed, please feel free to put it in the chat and then we can discuss. Okay, I see a question here. Oh, Lori answered it, so all good.
Thank you, Noam. I think between Connie and myself, we answered most of the questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds great. Okay, so if there's no further questions then, again, I just want to thank you all for being here and participating throughout this session. I hope this was insightful for you all. If there are any future questions, again, I encourage you to reach out. Please feel free and I'm happy to answer those questions for you or even connect with you regarding any of the resources that we have on our website. So if there's something you're interested in or just want more information in, again, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. And thank you so much. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.